Hey class, we're going to try something new, the disembodied Duffy voice, talking about the Roman Empire. As you can see, this map shows the Roman Empire in all of its grandeur, about 120 AD. First emperor, as you should be aware of, was Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar. After Caesar's death, he had fled the city and then participated in civil wars fought between the Senate and others for control of Rome. This is where Antony and Cleopatra were involved, famous figures in history. Upon his victory, he focused on consolidating his power and influencing the Senate to support him. The Senate declared him Augustus, or emperor, and he kept tabs on his rivals through spies, of course, and he maintained absolute total control over the army. So Octavian reorganized the state upon becoming emperor. He organized it into imperial and interior provinces. Imperial provinces were those provinces that were on the frontier of Rome. And these imperial provinces were directly under his control, and no senators were allowed. No senators were allowed entry into the imperial provinces without the emperor's express permission. Why, you might ask? Well, because that's where all 28 of the legions were stationed. You can think of Rome at this time as an egg. The egg shell were the 28 legions that were stationed along the borders, protecting it from external attack. If you got through that, it was all soft and mushy in the middle. The interior provinces were the Romanized areas. These were the areas of the empire like Italy, Gaul, again, North Africa. The most settled areas, the longest as part of the Roman Empire, these were controlled by the Senate and had no legions stationed there. Now, the Roman Empire enjoyed what's referred to as the Pax Romana shortly after Augustus's ascension to power in 27 BC. This period running to about 180 AD was referred to as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. There were very few civil wars, no invasions, and this led to a long, sustained period of peace, of Romanization, of integration of new areas into the Roman Empire. The legal system helped to Romanize many of these regions as well, as it helped people over generation to generation become Romanized, become acculturated into their society. The Mediterranean Sea was called Mare Nostrum, which was our sea. And as you can see, there's a good reason for that. It was completely surrounded by Roman territories. At its height, the empire covered 2.2 million square miles and contained about 120 million people in it. The government was answered to the emperor. He had total control over the government and the military. So he was truly a dictator. He was truly a despot in the truest sense of the word. The Senate met, but they didn't have any real power. Why? Because they didn't control the military. The military was the source of power in the Roman Empire. It took the army a while to figure that out, but once they did, that had pretty tragic effects on the Roman history, as we will see as we go forward. There was a substantial bureaucracy, big bureaucracy, government bureaucracy. It was a bureaucracy, and thus kind of like the Han bureaucracy, except the Han bureaucracy was run efficiently and with, you know, relatively free of graft and corruption. Well, that wasn't the way it was in Rome. Rome was pretty corrupt. They engaged in tax farming, which was basically the state would auction off the ability to tax the provinces to anybody who, to the high bidder. They would essentially get the taxes paid up front, and then these private citizens would go and squeeze as many people as they could for as much money as they could, hoping to profit off the taxation process. As the empire became more mature, there was a flat 1% tax established on all goods, services, and then a head tax, which was basically a communal tax placed on towns, which had to pay for every person that lived in the town. That meant there had to be a census taken regularly to figure out who lived where. Bribing elected officials was common, indeed standard operating practice in the Roman Empire. The economy of the empire was slave-based, agriculture predominate. The goal here was to generate enough food to feed the cities and feed the legions. Trade was the lifeblood of the empire. Trade occurred throughout Europe, of course, Southwest Asia, North Africa. There's even some suggestion, as the map indicates, of trade between China and the Roman Empire indirectly through the Parthian Empire and Kushan empires. A road network, of course, was very important to trade. And again, you should be thinking in terms of all of those examples of empire. How did the Romans keep their people consolidated? In fact, I want you to answer that question on the Google form that accompanies this. What else do we got? Mediterranean was pirate free. The Roman Navy squashed out piracy. Life in the city of Rome. This was a city of over 1 million people, and most of them were unemployed. Plebeians. They lived on a government dole of bread and attended theater, attended the games of the amphitheater, games sponsored, gladiatorial games sponsored by senators, the emperor, noblemen currying favor with the mob, so to speak. And this was called bread and circuses. The bread, the daily food dole, and then the circus, the entertainment piece. There was a profound division between the haves and the have-nots. The haves, the patricians, through lavish parties, dressed in the finest jewelry and expensive clothing, lived in these beautiful, spacious villas, while the poor, the plebeians, the have-nots, had no money. They lived in 6-story cramped apartment buildings that were prone to collapse and fires that would sweep through Rome. Now, life in the provinces was a completely different story. It's here where the security of the Pax Romana meant that towns could spring up with no walls, no expenses to, for defense. Hundreds of towns and cities sprang up through what would become eventually France and England, Spain, North Africa, all around the Mediterranean. It was a much simpler life than that which was found in the cities, in the urban areas. People farmed. They weren't dependent upon the latifundia, these slave-based farms that were generating food just for the cities. They raised their families. They lived their lives. 200 years of peace is pretty amazing. Now, life along the frontiers was a little bit of a different story. The Roman Empire, of course, used client states. They had buffers to protect themselves against invasion, and that should sound vaguely familiar. The use of client kingdoms, client kings rather. For example, this was all along the German border, the east of the Rhine River. Romans diplomacy converted it into a semi-civilized area where the Germanic tribes became mercenaries working for the Romans. They provided most of the troops in the later Roman Empire, in fact. Now, the Roman army was the primary means by which new citizens were added to the empire. As part of their retirement, they became citizens and were granted land and money to settle, usually along the border. Now, the emperors, this succession of emperors is really more for entertainment value. I'm not going to really be testing you too tightly on this, except I want you to know who Octavian was, of course, and a couple of these guys, Constantine, Diocletian. The Julian emperors, about 80 years of Julian emperors, the 5 emperors following Octavian, so the 5 after Octavian through Nero, were evil, corrupt, and or insane. Post-Julian, the next 30 years or so, they were mostly insane, amoral, and most of them did not live their lives out. They were assassinated. There were 5 good emperors that whose 90 years roughly of rule coincides with the end of the Pax Romana. They were good mainly because they were not insane. They were militarily successful at stabilizing the borders of the Roman Empire, and they had, again, long reigns, which meant stable rule. Now, the decline of imperial Rome came about in the following 100 years. From 180 to about 284 AD, there were 30 emperors that ruled in succession. And the fact that they had such short rules meant there was a lot of political paralysis. Since they weren't emperor for very long, they didn't make decisions, and the state kind of became paralyzed. Civil wars racked the empire as the borders were stripped of troops to be brought into Rome to fight it out with their competitors. And it's at this point where the army figured out, wow, we control who becomes emperor. And they began doing just that. They would proclaim their general emperor, demand money from their emperor, their declared general, or else they'd be assassinated. That's not good. So there's several reasons for the decline of imperial Rome that we'll talk about in class. And there was a partial recovery and some reforms that kept the empire going for another 100 years or so. Diocletian is one of these emperors I want you to know. So Octavian, Diocletian, and Constantine the Great. Diocletian doubled the size of the army, excluded patricians from military command, so to keep those nobles out of any connection with the army, and he essentially established a caste system throughout the Roman Empire. Now, it didn't stick, but he wanted to lock people into whatever position they had at the time. It was unsuccessful, but again, this is kind of the desperation that he was feeling. Constantine saw a period where the Roman Empire was collapsing. City populations were shrinking, trade was declining, farmland was going to waste. He moved the capital from Rome to Byzantium, renaming the city Constantinople. And here's Byzantium, what became Constantinople, now modern-day Istanbul. He also allowed for the worship of Christianity throughout the empire, and in fact converted to the religion on his deathbed. So we'll cover the decline of Rome and the fall of the Western Empire in class. But I wanted to give you this overview of the Roman Empire by way of video. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow in class.